Rick Brimacombe of Brimacombe and Associates. I'm your architect of business growth, and I'll work with you to unlock your potential and amplify the scale of your company. Today, we're talking about the federal government as an investor in small business. Before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsors, Irish Titan, an e-commerce and web development firm, Highland Bank, a locally owned community bank, Romaine Berg, a digital marketing agency, Schwegman, Lumberg, Woosner, an intellectual property law firm, and Voyager U, a catalytic gateway for growing your independent work life. Please hit the subscribe and like button. That will allow us to let you know when we are going live and to serve up high quality content to you, our wonderful audience. You can also now catch Club B on your favorite podcast platform, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, and many others. All right, with that, I would like to introduce today's guest, a returning guest. Welcome, Chip Laingen. Chip is Executive Director of the Defense Alliance. Hey, Chip.
Hey, Rick, great to be with you.
Yeah, glad to have you back. Thanks for joining us again. Chip's contact information is in the comments field. However, if you are listening to us here today, it's C as in Chip and then Langdon, which is spelled Laingen at defensealliance.com. Again, his contact information is in the comments field, though, if you are watching us. All right, Chip, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your firm, and the various things that you're involved with.
Thanks, Rick. It's great to be with you. And I just want to say I'm so appreciative of the way you all do business. We're champions of small business here and working extensively with the Small Business Administration, and the model that you've set up is really terrific. So thank you for what you do.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah, my background is military. I did 21 years in the Navy, flying helicopters off of small ships for 21 years. Loved it, every day of it. Left kicking and screaming in 2004. My wife was a little bit tired of camping, so she dragged me back up here to Minnesota, and had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up, and ended up working for a small company that wanted to figure out how to do defense contracting. And it kind of, my career kind of went in an odd direction from there unexpectedly. So I run Defense Alliance, as you mentioned. I'll give you a little background on that later if you like. I'm also adjunct faculty at the University of Minnesota in the Technological Leadership Institute in 2 degree programs, security studies and the management of technology. So that is great for me because I learn more from the student body there. These are a lot of mid-career folks in technology companies and folks doing startups. And I just get a wealth of knowledge from them and interacting with what they're doing. So that's kind of my other half of my career path right now.
Hey, in one of our prior talks, we told a few Navy stories, and actually it just dawned on me that we could almost spend the entire session talking about Navy stories. But for today, let's just do one or a question. Curious what you maybe took as the most significant learning from your time flying the helicopters in the Navy to now being a business guy. So, and if you can't boil it down to one, maybe there's 2 or 3 kind of key things that you have with you today that you think benefit you the most in the business community.
Well, it's interesting. 2 things come to mind. The military is a very unique culture, obviously. But I went from a destroyer to a manufacturing firm. And when I told the CEO after about 6 months, I said, it's like I never left the Navy, because a destroyer has about 150 people, executives work upstairs, people making the wire and cable are downstairs. We were right by a rail yard, and trains would go by, the building would shake just like a destroyer does when it's changing speed. And from a leadership perspective, it's like I never left. The executives were like the officers upstairs, and the sailors were downstairs. And the fundamentals of leadership and getting things out the door and getting production happening was exactly the same. So that was an interesting takeaway for me. Second, I flew helicopters, which are very complex machines. And the one I flew probably had 300 or 400 subcontractors, civilian subcontractors that made parts and pieces for that. The current F-35 program, I forget the exact number, but I think there's something like 5,000 subcontractors that make something that makes the F-35 go. And that really struck me too. It's like, wow, there's a lot of small business and innovation that goes into these complex machines, and the same thing in the healthcare field and everything else. And it's a real tribute to ingenuity and innovation that can happen. It can all boil down into one machine, and we can go off and do our thing. It's pretty gratifying.
Cool. I do want to file that idea away of coming back on another show and just talk kind of Navy stuff and how it relates to the business world and things you learned and such. So I actually think that would be fun. So let's do that in the future.
That sounds great, Rick.
A couple of other categories that I know you're interested in, either with different groups that you've had involvement with over the years or just, personal interests. But talk a little bit about a couple of the categories which jumped out to me, and some of that relates to things I'm interested in. Some of those relates to things that Brimacombe Capital hasn't invested in. But talk a little bit about your interest in cybersecurity, robotics, and then clean tech.
So, I've been extensively involved with the government customer, broadly defined, for about 16 years since I left the service. And, what the government cares about comes and goes. It varies depending on the state of technology, what the warfighters need for the current threats, the political environment. But those categories have been pretty relevant this entire time. And cybersecurity especially has really, as most people know, has ramped up over the past 5 years, and really especially the past year. And the Department of Defense and the federal government more broadly is in, quite frankly, it's desperation mode, panic mode to try to fix the hemorrhaging that happens of our information and the damage that happens to companies across the board. And it's fascinating to me because there's actually relatively easy solutions for a lot of this. We're working with a couple small businesses right now that I think could transform and stop the hemorrhaging almost overnight, at least until the enemy, quote unquote, finds a new way to do it. But there's some transformational technologies. The problem is we work in a system, a democratic republic, that often doesn't make sense, right? So getting that technology into the customer and then widespread, that's tough because our process is really challenging. And I'll show you a slide later about the complexity of the federal procurement process. But the bottom line is the innovation's there to fix it. The ingenuity is there. And we need entrepreneurs that have the tenacity and frankly the patience to bring it to the forefront and then force the right customers to be buying it, most notably the federal government. But yeah, cyber is a huge threat. And then of course, clean tech, we've worked with Clean Tech Open, which is a national effort for many years. And that's a huge priority right now with the new presidential administration. That's one of the vagaries of the federal government every 4 years. If we switch parties, now we're back to clean tech and climate change and things like that. So that's taking center stage right now. But that takes time. The Biden administration has signaled that effort. It'll be about a year and a half before the procurement system kind of catches up with that. And then the third category was robotics, but I'd broaden that out now. It's more really the supporting technology around robotics and the other systems that are adjacent to that. I think of artificial intelligence, machine learning, AI, ML, and autonomous systems, of course, which go with robotics. That's huge right now. The Department of Defense is automating a lot of things, from reducing the manpower on destroyers. You know, I mentioned I served on a destroyer. We had about 350 people on the bigger ones. Now they're manning the same ships with 80 people. And that's because they need to reduce the manpower to save costs. That's their biggest cost is personnel. And things like AI and machine learning are going to reduce those personnel needs. And incidentally, for entrepreneurs that are in this region, there's a lot of technology clusters that are emerging around these areas, right? At Grand Forks up in North Dakota, if you want to go that far north, it's an emerging technology cluster that the Department of Defense is funding significantly. And then down in the Fargo-Moorhead area, the Grand Farm is launching in a big way around ag tech. And there's a lot of AI and machine learning there and autonomous systems. They've got a sector of land that's going to be untouched by humans for 2 years, farmed entirely by autonomous systems. So long answer, but there's a lot of amazing need out there in technologies around just those 3 areas that you mentioned.
Yep. Well, I brought those up for a reason. I do have a Brimacombe Capital portfolio company in robotics. And in you mentioned ag tech in the Fargo area, Centera.com is a Brimacombe Capital portfolio company. And then cyber has always been of interest to me as well. So shifting gears to what you do at the Defense Alliance, the opportunities in federal contracting certainly look appealing from afar, and it appears that it's quite enormous. But as the saying goes, is the squeeze worth the effort? And so is the squeeze of federal contracting worth the effort?
Let me share my screen here. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
So Defense Alliance is a regional cluster in the Twin Cities, and we largely focus in the upper Midwest. We have members in 35 states, and we do 2 things primarily, and that is business development for startups, for small businesses, for legacy firms that are trying to transform, and largely accessing the federal market for resources, but not exclusively. Second, we assist regional economy efforts like what's going on in Grand Forks around autonomy, and Fargo around farming and ag tech. And we have a third area where we do advocacy for the national technology base. We're not allowed to lobby because we get public funds, so we just changed the word to advocacy and get around that. But that last piece is important because if you look at the procurement process, the way the federal government buys things, here's a map for you. Wow. This is why it takes 15 years to get the concept of an F-35 into a flying machine. It's really, really, really tough. And so we advocate, you mentioned the last piece that we do, we advocate with the DoD to try to fix that. We've had some impact. We're able to get contractors paid now on a net 10 basis. Most companies are used to net 30, net 60. That's something that we advocated for and achieved. So there are some bright spots around federal contracting. Of course, you got to get to that point where they're paying you, and it's tough. But so some background here. The federal government is obviously the largest single customer in the world, and frankly, it's the largest investor in anything. You name it: clean tech, batteries, medical systems. It's the largest investor. So if you're looking for non-dilutive capital, it's there. It's there in spades. It's and the government loves small business. One of the things that has happened over the years is there's been a concern about the national technology base becoming very large company focused. And you see the big prime contractors like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and even on the non-defense side, Cargill. There's been a lot of companies that buy up small businesses, right? And the concern has been, hey, we're going to lose some innovation if we don't foster smaller high-tech businesses. So the government's in that business. And it also loves what I call special categories. The government calls them underserved communities. And I look at it and say, well, they're not underserved at all. And it's things like women-owned companies, companies that are in hub zones and opportunity zones, veteran-owned companies, tribal enterprise. And those are good categories to be in if you're in federal contracting. And as that map showed you, it is incredibly complicated. But the opportunities, depending on what you want to do, can be vast. And I always tell folks, one of the things I've learned in the past 15 years is if you really look at the process and start to study it, if you're a rational human being, you'd never go down that path. So my advice is don't look at it too closely. Look at the opportunities really closely, get excited about it, and then just launch, just get into it. And are you going to have some issues and some challenges, some problems and some costs to stay relevant and to stay legal, so to speak? Yes. But I've found that the government is immensely forgiving on making mistakes, even in accounting, as long as there's no intentional fraud and you're doing something that they really want. They will work with you. So I tell folks, like, just jump in the game. And you know what? After 6 months or a year, you'll know if this isn't for you, and that's okay too. And you wouldn't have wasted a whole lot of time. I've seen in my 16 years roughly of doing this, only one case where the government said, you know what? You didn't read the fine print. We're going to come in and take your intellectual property. And it was no kidding, the black Suburban showed up and said, we're taking this. And that was a special material, carbon-based material that is being used significantly in a lot of different elements of the military now. And the good news there, though, is the government locked it down for a time, but that small business ended up thriving huge in the end. It took about 10 years. But everything was freed up, and now they're commercializing that still. So, and again, that's a huge exception. So, I would say you don't need to worry about that beforehand. However, like anything, it's something where you're probably not going to be selling just to the government. So, from a commercialization perspective, it's always obviously worthwhile to get advice from IP lawyers if you don't understand the process.
Sure.
Depending on what you do, though, I'm a big fan of trade secret versus patents. Again, it depends on the industry and what you're going to do with it. But a lot of markets, things are moving so fast, and folks outside the U.S. move to a different beat as far as the law goes. So, sometimes filing a patent on something, all it does is raise awareness for other people on what you're doing. My general advice is consider just keeping it secret, getting it to market quickly, and then moving on to the next thing.
Sure. So you don't have to write a dissertation with this question, but at a high level, just talk about the different types of funding that are available through the federal government. You talk about the government being such a large investor. Maybe just kind of categorize these and give people a general sense.
Yeah, good question. So in the Department of Defense, we call it the color of money. And we don't even refer to colors, but that's what they say. And there's generally 4 categories. And you have to ask yourself as an inventor, where do you fit in those categories before you decide how to go search for it? Because each of those categories has a specific search kind of process. The first is what I call long-term technology. And it's the early stage. The federal government uses the Technological Readiness Level Matrix, TRL. So you could Google TRL, Department of Defense, and you'll get a checklist of 0 through 9, what each level means. But the early stage technology pot of money is generally things like, and I'm sure Rick, you know about this, Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR.
Yep.
And you can learn about that at sbir.gov. And then there's the academic institution version of that, which is STTR. technology transfer research. And then there's other pots of money like SBIR that usually come in a broad agency announcement form. But those are things where it's early stage TRL, where you have a concept, or maybe you have a prototype started. And from a time frame perspective, it's something you think can be commercialized in 3 to 7 years. And so there's a whole way to search for that with keywords and NAICS codes on government websites. The second pot of money is late stage technology, so TRL 6 through 9 roughly, where maybe you have a prototype or you built something for somebody else, but it's got to be transformed into something different for a different customer in the Department of Defense or Commerce or Energy or wherever. And there's huge amounts of money for that. And those come in a broad agency announcement contract vehicle, BAA. And so you can go to Google and just put in BAA Special Operations Command or BAA Department of the Navy. And you'll see a standing 50, 60-page document with a whole bunch of topics. And it'll be broad, hence the term broad agency announcement. And it'll be NASA saying, you know, we're going to go to Mars and we need better ways to purify food or purify water or to make food. And we just need things to do that. And those are fantastic for businesses that have developed a concept or an idea or maybe a prototype to say, hey, we've got something for that. And you can propose a topic that averages about $1 million to $3 million. And you can say, hey, in 2 years, with 2.2 million, we'll give you a prototype ready to go to Mars to purify water. And there's so much money right now for that. That's being, you know, you see these $1 trillion programs are getting thrown out there by the Congress. There's a lot of BAA money in research for late stage technology right now. So let us know, because we can connect you to some amazing opportunities there. And then the third pot of money is, you know, you have something, it's selling somewhere else. You want to sell the exact same thing with the government. Paperclip, a syringe, whatever it is, the government buys everything. And that is usually done on GSA schedule. It's the government shopping mall, basically. And then there's one more pot of money, which is what's called urgent technology. And maybe it's, I mentioned Special Operations Command, maybe operators, SEALs in the battlefield need a better lens for their night vision goggles, and they need it in 90 days. Can you help us? And the nice thing about those is it's not usually a lot of money or something you can commercialize, but the margins on things like that are just out of this world. You can get 500% margin on things like that because they need something in 90 days.
All right, that's very helpful. I was taking notes there. And a reminder to listeners to please hit the subscribe and like button. And you can also get Chip's email address in the comments field of YouTube. All right, so talk a little bit about how a small business can get started as a federal contractor. Let's say somebody's come to the conclusion of, yes, I think it makes sense. Yes, I'm willing to throw my hat in the ring. I'm ready to get started. How do they go about doing that?
So the first thing you got to do is register yourself as a federal contractor. So you just go to the System for Award Management, SAM, and that's sam.gov. And it's fairly self-explanatory. It's about a 2-week process or less. I mean, you can get the basics done in an hour or two, just filling in forms online. But then there's some back and forth where they give you a DUNS number and these other things that come from the federal government. And that's why it takes about 2 weeks. That's step one. We have a lot of companies that start searching and they find amazing opportunities and they start reaching out to the government, and the government comes back and says, well, I don't see you in SAM, so we're not going to talk to you. So you got to do that at least. The biggest thing there is that system then searches for reasons not to do business with you. So if there's accounting issues or you've had you know, crimes in the past, you're going to get rejected. Otherwise, everybody kind of gets in the system. It's relatively simple. Just be aware though that if you Google how to register with the government, be careful, because there's a lot of folks that will say, oh, this is hard, we'll register for you, and they'll charge you $3,000. It's free. So go to sam.gov, go to the source and do it. That's how you start. And then it's, then you've got to figure out, okay, where do I go? What agency, what prime contractor that represents an agency? Where do I fit? And organizations like ours, Defense Alliance, we can help you do that. There's also procurement technical assistance centers, or PTACs, in every state, funded by the federal government. And they exist to help you figure out how to do federal contracting. And you'll find out that everything is centered on defense in terms of process. The DoD drives all the processes. So if you're going to contract with USDA or Commerce, the process and the accounting is largely driven by the Department of Defense. So just don't be surprised by that. But again, there's folks like us that can help you, walk you through that process. We're happy to do it for free, and PTAC is generally free also.
How about for the folks that have no prior history doing this? Will that hinder their ability to secure contracts or affect their chances in any way?
Yeah, good question. So you'll see that in the SAM process. You'll see that if you apply for a contract or a research and development grant or contract. That question is front and center, and it does tend to scare some companies off. Don't be scared off by that. It's a hurdle you have to get over, absolutely. And how do you get over it? There's really two ways. One, you provide something they really, really need, and you answer the questions that they're asking. I see a lot of folks that they have a better impact card, credit card like this, and they're convinced it's better. And by God, I'm going to tell the government they need this because it's what they want. The government doesn't care what you have. They care about what they need. So make sure, I know it sounds obvious, but make sure that you address very specifically what they want, and how you can bring them what they need and make it better, cheaper, faster, lighter. If you can bring other added value, by all means mention that, but meet the basics first and then the added value.
Okay.
The second thing you can do is, well, 2 and 3 really, bring a partner with you that has done government contracting before. So let's say you're a cybersecurity services company. Look at the solicitation, the request from the government, and ask yourselves, can you bring another partner with you, maybe that's built something on the hardware side? So you're not competing with this partner, but you're going to answer the call with 2 small businesses or maybe 3, and one of which hasn't done prior work, but hey, so what? You've got a partner that has, that can help shepherd you through that. The third thing is if you have prior history of selling your idea or your product or service with anybody, saying, well, I haven't worked with the government, but I've sold this number of contracts, this number of devices to these players. And if it's a 3M or something recognizable, that can be very helpful, that they see evidence that you're selling to quote unquote reputable places as well.
All right, so I don't want to do it here while we're talking today, but I have another portfolio company that I want to tell you about after this. So
Great.
I will reach out to you on that. How about examples of how startups have leveraged federal R&D funding? I'm sure you got a story or 2 that you could share with our audience.
Yeah, let me do that. But first of all, that sparks another thought too, that, especially in the R&D side, folks might think, wow, I've got a really cool idea. I wonder if the government would want to buy it. Or I wonder what the government thinks the state of the art is currently on a particular device. And so even just the search process of going to FedBizOps, which FBO, I'm take that back, it's SAM now. FBO, Federal Business Opportunities, has moved to SAM. Everything the government wants right now is on SAM. So you can put in a keyword, cyber artificial intelligence or a NAICS code if you have that. And you can search every opportunity the government is looking for, including research and development. So you might see something that says, NASA, I need a better water purification device in 7 years. And it's an incredible business intelligence tool because you can see companies that have bid on that are currently supplying the government, and it's all there. You can get the names of the companies, their contact information, what they're selling, what the contract value was, everything. The beauty of being in a public system. So even if you're not going to do R&D with the government, remember it's a valuable business intelligence resource tool if you go down that path.
Okay.
Two examples come to mind. One is a company named Roving Blue, which is, I was thinking water purification, so that's why they came to mind. They're in Wisconsin. And we met with them, gosh, maybe 5 years ago now, and they said, hey, we make this really cool field portable water purification device. Would the Marine Corps like this or the Army? And I said, I don't know, but here's 5 field exercises that happen every year, where you as a small business at your cost can go out to the field and demonstrate your product in front of Marines and sailors and airmen and soldiers, and they'll try to break your product and try to make it better and all this stuff. The design requirements you get out of that are enormous. And I bring that example up because Roving Blue invested in that themselves, travel, time. They didn't spend a lot of money, but it was significant. But what they got back in terms of design requirements was enormous. And interestingly, they never really did well in terms of government contracting, but the lessons they learned from the military improved their product immensely. And it provided actually contacts commercially, which is where they're selling now. The other example is Minnesota Wire, where Defense Alliance was born. A small wire and cable company right here in St. Paul. It has been doing the same thing for 50 years. And the CEO said, China and Mexico is starting to take our lunch here. And by the way, wire and cable has never changed. 100 years. Nobody's ever said, let's build an F-35. The last thing to think about is all wired up. And this CEO said, you know what, let's try to change that. And he went to the federal government and literally coached them into writing an SBIR that could be the genesis of changing wire and cable for the future. Electrical interconnect systems, electromagnetic shielding. And one SBIR led to 3, led to a rapid innovation funding. And here it is, roughly 15 years later, that company has had at least 20 million in R&D contracts from all the services. And it literally transformed not only the company, but it transformed what wire and cable is. They're the only company, to my knowledge, that's building non-metallic wire for aircraft and space systems. And you can imagine it never corrodes. It's 80% lighter. It's invisible to radar. And all because this one little company here in the heartland said, you know what? I think we can do this better. Let's find an investor that cares about maybe transforming things and then not taking my IP and my cash.
I like the stories there, and it's good to hear different things that you've been able to do. And maybe while we're here, you said about the Defense Alliance being born. You kind of alluded to it a little bit on the front end, but why don't we just take a moment and drill a little deeper into the Defense Alliance and actually what you do?
Yeah, so like I said, we were born in that small company in Minnesota Wire. And at the time we were saying, gosh, this is really hard. This is complicated. Where do I go? And at the time there was no place in Minnesota really that focused on that. So kind of by accident, we were learning things. And we said, we got to share these lessons with other companies. And so we had a meeting, and then there was another meeting. And then it became a monthly ritual, get together and share lessons with 8 or 10 small businesses. And then we gave it a name and we gave it a website. And like anything in life, you wake up one day, it's like, oh man, we built this big thing, and I'm not being a businessman coming from the military. It screwed up the business model. We didn't monetize it. We didn't say, hey, you're going to be a member and pay dues. And for any of you that are involved in business associations, you know how hard it is to get small businesses to pay dues to anything, because of the bottom line, right? It's expensive. So we went to the federal government and said, hey, we've got this incredible cluster of companies. And happenstance, the Small Business Administration back in 2010 was putting out a call for building technology clusters around the country with stimulus dollars back in 2010. And 450 entities submitted proposals. And we were one of 10 that won, 3 of which were defense oriented by design. And so now to this, at this point, there's 65 federally funded clusters in the country, some SBA, but others are DOD and Commerce, EDA, other agencies. Of those 65 technology clusters, we're the only one that's a small business. And guess who has the best metrics out of all 65? We do. We're pretty proud of that. And so we're very attentive to the bottom line. We understand what it's like to be a small business. And again, what we do, Rick, is we sit down with someone who's interested in going down this path and really drill down into why you want to do this. Now, are you really strategically invested and ready to go down this path? And do you have something that the government truly needs? And so we can walk companies through that, startups through that. And sometimes, you know, we talk about it. That's the beauty of being a free consultant. We're not going to waste your time and vice versa, right? But every now and then we find somebody and we say, holy cow, where have you been? This is a whole new approach to cybersecurity that'll change the paradigm. And then it's at that point, it's about building relationships for the process, but it's also building relationships. I'm going to bring up, if I can, Rick, if we got time.
Yep.
Bring up my screen again here. And I'll talk a little bit about process, because process is a huge part of what we do, making sure companies are thinking.
Haven't seen it yet.
Right.
Haven't seen it yet if you're trying to pull it up.
Okay, where is it here? Share. Huh. For some reason.
Okay, there. We got a helicopter and probably a destroyer in the background.
All right, I'm sharing the wrong screen here, so let me find the right screen. I don't know why it doesn't want to come up. So I will try something else. So bear with me here. But like I said, while I'm trying to do that, the biggest thing with these businesses is, you know, like any company builds a strategic plan, you have something that's actionable. Can you truly follow it? So we spend a lot of time making sure that when you are building a strategic path, are you doing something that's affordable? You have the right team in place, that kind of thing. I don't know what happened to my ability to share.
Well, from this side, it looks like you should be able to, but okay, there you go. Federal government as a small business investor is the slide we're seeing.
Okay. So hopefully you're seeing that. Sorry about that. So one of the things we do is we have a very unique commercialization path that we talk companies through. I have a colleague that worked in 3M for 36 years, and Norb Biederman. He actually largely developed the federal market presence for 3M. And so he's more suited to talk about this. But we spend time with these businesses talking about their technology or their product, and that can be a service or an actual device. And we do this process where we explore, we qualify, and we deploy on the front end, and that's the kind of creating the path forward. And then there's the make process and the commercialization process. And so all of these areas have more detailed kind of process involved with them. We try to keep it clean and simple compared to government processes. We want to make sure that companies are thinking, in a very systematic way about bringing a technology or product to the market. And then we talk about, how do you really win in the federal market? And I view it as really a three-step process. Number one, you've really got to know your own capabilities, be honest with yourself. CEOs are dreamers, innovators are dreamers, right? And that's great. God bless you. But the government wants something real and something achievable and something attainable in their system, and that may not be compatible. And then once you know that, attack the opportunities, and then you really have to have a process there for, how do you systematically search in the right color of money that we talked about earlier? Are you truly systematic in the way you do that? Because the requirements of the military change periodically, or the federal government. And there's ways to influence opportunities as well. You can participate in what's called RFIs, requests for information. And if you don't have a process that pops those up when they happen, you're not going to be able to contribute to those RFIs and help design solicitations that you can go then bid on. And then finally, managing your relationships. Like any market that you're exploring that's new, it has a unique culture, and you're coming in as an outsider. And you have to have the ability to develop trust over time. And especially with the Department of Defense, there is obviously a very unique culture and language and a hell of a lot of acronyms. And if you're not at least trying to speak that language, you're going to get ignored. It's like being an English speaker in Paris. It takes a while to develop some trust there. And so these three things kind of happen sequentially, but then they happen in tandem, and it happens over and over. It's a repeatable process. And so we spend a lot of time with companies talking about this very thing. And then finally, we talk to companies that are involved in the research and development side to think about R&D from really two different perspectives. Yourself as a business, and then the federal government as the client, because it's often a very different mindset when it comes to the federal government. On the bottom here, looking at what is the universe that you care about, knowing your strengths, like we talked about. What is the universe that the federal government cares about? They care about price, value, past performance. Are you part of a disadvantaged class of small business? Those other things that you think shouldn't matter but do matter to the federal government. And then the second step is the only area really where things get compatible. You get a contract and you're adhering to a robust plan. And then finally, getting to the top here, number 3, you've met the program requirements for your federal customer, but now it's time for you to leverage that. So you might do an SPIR for the government. That's great, not much money. You need to keep your eye on the prize, which is checking the block for the customer, but then moving on to the commercial market, because that's really where the money is. The good news is the federal government, by law, has to care about your commercialization path beyond their needs. So in other words, when you apply for any federal contracts that's R&D, you have to lay out your commercialization path to sell your product beyond their specific needs. And they will coach you and help you through that process. Because again, if you're selling something in the market 3 years from now, that means your volume is up, your processes are better. What does that do? That lowers your costs to the government eventually. and it makes you viable as a supplier for future needs. So again, it's kind of busy slides here, but it just reinforces that we're very process oriented with businesses because we want them to be disciplined about their approach and be thinking about the long-term path, because it is a long-term path in working with the government.
So speaking of your slides, are these slides that you'd be willing to share, or is this kind of internal stuff? Yeah.
No, absolutely, and I believe all of this is on our website too at defensealliance.com. So, but yeah, feel free to send this out to all your cohort, and we'd love to chat with anybody about these processes.
Or folks that are interested, you can put something in the comments field, and we will do our best to reach out to you. All right, so talk a little bit about what the federal government is interested in right now from a technology innovation perspective. I mean, I'm sure that changes over time, but that's a second follow-on question. But what are they looking for right now? You've mentioned cyber a couple of times, but what are some other technologies, or is it just cyber that the government is interested in?
Well, there's a lot, and depending on the agency, they'll say, well, no, this is more important. But there's two holy grails: cyber, we just talked about, and in that realm, it's two things. One, can you do something that truly changes the paradigm so that you're not just in a reactive mode, but you've got a technology that is going to put the enemy on defense rather than us? And I don't know what that is, but can you do something that changes the game? That's a holy grail right now.
Okay.
Because most of the cyber stuff is very iterative and reactive. The second thing in the cyber realm is, can you make it affordable for small business? If you're a government supplier, a DoD supplier, you have to be certified under something new called CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And there's degrees of readiness depending on where you are as a supplier. If you're a Lockheed Martin, you've got to be the top readiness level. If you're a Roving Blue, you can be on the lower end. But either way, you've got to certify that you're cyber secure as a company, and it's expensive. And there's a lot of folks capitalizing on that right now and selling expensive solutions to companies that don't cost what they should cost. So if you can bring a solution to the market for small business around anything cyber, that's big. And the DoD will help you do that, commercialize that kind of product or service. The second holy grail for the military, at least, is batteries. If you can build a better battery, that's it, man. You're the next Bill Gates. That's everything. Batteries have reached, I think, an asymptote level where they're not going to get much better. Traditional batteries, right? So if you're, and I say it's important, I mean, if you're a SEAL team and you're going into do a 5-week in the field mission, you take a lot of batteries into the field, AA batteries. And what do SEALs do? They come back from a night vision goggle mission, they take out their batteries. They're only 10% depleted. What do? They throw them out. They put new ones in because they want 100% the next time. So there's a lot of waste in the government. I forget the figure, but the government spends well over $1 billion on AA batteries alone. So, find something better. And it's going to be something transformative. It's going to be a capacitor or something like that, fusion. I don't know. But those are the two biggest areas. And then the others are, it depends who you talk to. AI and machine learning is huge because it goes across just about every industry sector. Right? There's an application for AI and ML in any industry, and that influences manufacturing. And in that realm too, the government wants better, more efficient manufacturing processes. And that leads to things like advanced materials, better robotics and machining. So that's big right now. Space systems are big. There's been a big infusion of money going into space systems. On the bio side, and this new administration is going to infuse a lot of money into biotechnology, and it's everything from pathogen detection in unique environments, by the way, like space, like underwater, and rapidity of detection and diagnosing in the field. How fast can you diagnose what these pathogens represent? And then biosystems for energy. The University of Minnesota just won last year a big award from DoD. 81 million, I believe, is the dollar figure, to build a center around biotechnology, mostly for the energy field. So algae fuels, the YF-18s with, things like that. And again, this is administration specific. There was a big emphasis under the Obama administration for that kind of thing. That took a back seat under Trump, and now it's back in the foreground. So there's a lot of late stage technology that was developed, by the way, by these folks in these areas, that they built prototypes, sat on the shelf in the energy area, renewable fuels, and they're sitting there waiting for people to commercialize late stage prototypes. There's a lot of money for that right now. And then something I'm seeing a little bit of now is energetics. I'll be honest, I don't quite understand that. But locally, for instance, Northrop Grumman, you might know them previously as ATK or Orbital ATK up in Plymouth. They do a lot of munitions work and solid rocket booster munitions and all this stuff, space systems. But they're really looking for people that can do energetics around munitions. So that's what comes to mind right now. I mean, there's a lot of other areas, biodefense, plastics, you name it. The governments, they want new and better and lighter and cheaper.
Sure. And how fast do these interests change? Are these themes that have been around for a little bit, or if I called you next month, you'd have another list of interests?
No, it's pretty good. I mean, the DoD, I always laugh. The DoD is like the only organization in the world that still works on the Soviet budgeting system. It's kind of a 5-year plan, and it goes in 2-year budget cycles. And I won't get into the detail, but if you do have an innovation in whatever area, energy systems or something, you can actually look out 5 years and look out 2 years generally to see what the government wants. And those macro things don't change that much, even with administrations, because, again, President Biden comes in and it's back to, climate change and renewable fuels and battery systems and EVs. But it takes 1.5 years, 2 years to get those things in place. And then who knows, maybe it's another administration here in 3 years. And so things change, but it's a slow roll. Okay. And the other thing too is, from a small business perspective, there's so much money out there, it doesn't matter what you do, the government's going to fund it in some way. Sure. So I wouldn't get hung up on the rapidity of change, because even priorities that go away, there's still somebody buying it.
Okay. So we're heading towards the finish line here for today. I do think that I'm going to have you back. There's a couple of things I'd like to follow up on, but for today anyway, if there was one key takeaway that you'd like to leave our audience with, what would it be and why?
Oh, interesting. So there's like 5 things that come to mind, Rick, but one I think it's really interesting is, and I think I touched on this, the government doesn't value things in the way that you think they do. So if you have something that you think is just so much better, and you're going to bring that to the government and say, of course they're going to buy it. You might even find that you do have a better battery, and you might even have an agency say, yeah, I want that, and I'm going to fund it. And you think, okay, this is great. This is just going to happen. It doesn't work that way, right? The government, it's a competitive process because it's public money. they value things that you don't think they should value. You think they should bring the most efficient, best product to the customer? Not really. They want to spend the money in the most fair way, give some money to one companies and better companies. And the process itself, I put that slide up there, you know, the government can't get around its own processes sometimes. So don't think that what you bring is what they want, or that it's going to be easy to sell to them, even if they really, really, really want it. So what that means practically is you've got to be patient, you've got to build those relationships, and you've got to be talking to the right people. So you don't get frustrated and just leave, because eventually there's a way to get it funded. And as one Secretary of the Navy once told me, I was talking about this frustration. He says, you know, Chip, we're not going to do the right thing in this instance, but we're going to, by God, we're going to do the American thing. And sometimes those two things line up, and sometimes they don't. And you know, if you're a person that gets frustrated by that level of dysfunction, then you know maybe federal contract isn't for you. But again, I'll come back to that eventually we do the right thing and buy the right stuff, and it has great impact for keeping our soldiers safe, keeping them effective, and spinning off into the commercial market and doing some great things for people.
All right. So Chip, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you.
So I'm at defensealliance.com or claingen at defensealliance.com by email. You can call me anytime. I always tell folks that when you run an agency that has an organization that has members in 35 states, I kind of do the two phone call rule. I may not get back to you the first time, but if you're persistent and call me a second time, I'll probably call you back. And that gets you ready for the government side too, right? Because you get ignored a lot. And I'll see if you're truly persistent. But we're here for you. You know, we're an SBA resource partner. Most of what we do is done for free. We do have a fee-based structure for folks that are truly invested and really jumping in the game. You know, we can take this to the next level with you. And the other thing about us is we're connected because we're a federally funded technology cluster. We're connected all over the country to resources that you may not know about, that maybe is something that we can't provide, but sure as heck can find somebody that can get you what you need.
Okay. A reminder, it's C Laingen, C as in Chip, and Laingen is LAINGEN at defensealliance.com. Chip, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you back again.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate what you do.
And thanks, Chip.